Hi and welcome to this screencast on functions. Today I'm going to tell you how you create a function and how you work with input and produce outputs. I'm going to talk about variable scope and give you some rules of thumb when to encapsulate your code into a function. Creating a function in Python is quite easy. First you need to type the keyword def, which means define, and now I can simply type in the name of my function. I will make a function called sum and square. And now in parentheses I type in the input argument of my function. In this case I will have two inputs called a and b. And finally I have a colon here at the end, meaning that I'm now defining a function. And now the body of my function, the code which my function will execute, I type that underneath, but moved in one tab, like this. So my function here, I will compute a variable called result and set that equal to a plus b squared. And finally, I need to output or return my result from my function, and I do that by typing return result. Alright? Once I've done that, I can save my function in a file. I'll press Ctrl S and save it in a file called sum and square.py. And now I can simply press run file, or F5, and my file will be run in my console. And once it's been run, I can use it down here simply by typing sum and square. And now I can give it two values as arguments which will be put into a and b. For example, I can put in 8 and 2. Now my function should add those two, that's 10, and square it, that's 100, and return the result. And it works. There are a couple of common mistakes that people sometimes make when creating a function. So one common mistake is to reset the input variables inside the function body. So for example, if I set the value of a to 100 and save my function, then when I call the function again with the input variables 8 and 2, you see the result is something quite different. Even though I pass in 8 for the value of a, it gets reset to 100, and that's why the result is different. So you must be careful not to reset the input variables here. Another common mistake is to forget to return the result. So now the function simply computes the result, but it doesn't return it. You can actually see out here that the code analysis shows that the local variable result is assigned but never used. So that's an indication that there's something wrong. Now if I run my file again, if I run my function sum and square with 8 and 2, again I see there's simply no output. And that's because the function doesn't return anything. So I must remember to have my return statement up here, and then it works. Now I'll create a script that uses my sum and square function. So I press new file, and I create a script where I first make two variables, one called first, and I assign the value 8, one called second, and I assign the value 2, and a third one called third, and I assign the output of the sum and square function to that. As inputs to the function, I pass the variables first and second. Now I can save my script. I'll save it in a file called myscript.py, and I can run it by pressing F5. Now we can see when the script runs, it creates my two variables first and second, and it also creates the variable third, and it gets the value 100, which is the output of the sum and square function. So out here we can see we pass the variables first and second into the sum and square function. Inside the function, those two values are now put into a and b. So inside the function we still just work with the variable names a and b, and we produce the result. Inside the function we don't know anything about the names of the variables outside. And in the same way, outside here in the script we don't know anything about a and b and what happens inside the function. So we say that the variables out here and the variables inside the function are in different scope. That's a good thing, because then we can write and test our function independent from any other code that uses it. Now I chose to put my scripts and my function in two different files, and that's not always a good idea. Now I have restarted Spyder, and if I try to run my script, I will get an error message. So basically it says that it cannot find the file sum and square, the function is not defined. So to get this to work, I would have to go to sum and square and run that file, and then I would be able to run my script again. As an alternative, you could also simply put everything in one file, so I could have my script down here below my function, like this, and that would work. Another alternative would be to simply put in an import statement here as part of my script. So I could write from sum and square import star, and in this case star just means to import everything. If I do this, I can now run my scripts, and it will automatically import the function from the summandsquare.py file. There are a few rules of thumb that you should consider when writing functions. First of all, your functions should have a clear and simple purpose. It should be well defined what the inputs are and what the output is. The function name should be very describing and telling of what the function does. The function shouldn't be too long. Usually you shouldn't have more than what you can have on screen without scrolling inside a function. Usually that would be less than 20 lines, but almost always less than 100 lines. Of course, there can be arguments sometimes to have longer functions than that, but these are the rules of thumb. Whenever you find yourself reusing parts of your code, you should consider making a function. That'll make it easier for you to reuse your code, and if you decide to change your code at some point, you only have to make changes one place inside that function.